It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello, and welcome to It's Just Business, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports, media, legal, business, industrial complex. Joining me today for a deep discussion is Steve, as always. Hello, Steve.
This sounded like the nice guy, Chris Larry. It's like, who am I talking to? Where did will the real Chris Larry please stand up? Like, what in the heck was that?
I'm just trying to show the audience that I'm versatile.
Yeah, he's versatile. He's a real host. Oh my goodness!
I'm one of those multi-position players Ron Rivera loves.
Yeah, he can take on a lot of roles.
A Buffalo nickel right here.
Because I sniffed you out from the beginning. This has got to be a bit. I know it's a bit, but it totally threw me just having to listen to it. Oh goodness!
How you doing this morning, Steve?
What's that?
I said, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, everything's well. Over here in Texas. So you can't complain. I mean, I can always complain. One of my best skills in life is complaining. I'm really good at finding things to complain about if I want to, but I'm just going to spare the audience and not do that. And just say everything is going wonderful. And we've got some great stories and whatnot to talk about. There's lots of suffering, and that makes me happy, because it gives me good things to talk about. So all that's wonderful.
Well, then let's start out, Steve. Maybe we'll call this Steve's risk assessment corner as we look at the...
Welcome to the risk assessment corner, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, fascinating, right? But if you care about the NFL, if you're wondering about the NFL, is the shield going to get dinged? Is the race car going to get slowed? It seems like there are areas of vulnerability, Steve. Was that how you would put it?
Yeah. So we touched on a month ago, 2 months ago maybe, this story about St. Louis suing the NFL, and we kind of blew it off, and it was just like a mention at the end of a show, I think. It just said, hey, by the way, there's this appeal thing going on. Well, I finally got my act together and pulled the petition, and there's some stuff, like bigger picture issues that we're going to touch on with this lawsuit. So what's going on here? If you recall, the St. Louis Rams left and became the Los Angeles Rams in 2016, I think it was. And this, as it turns out, made the St. Louis local government very unhappy because they had spent a ton of money and done a lot of things. And they felt that the leadership of the St. Louis Rams, now Los Angeles Rams, lied to them and publicly lied. So there's actually, it turns out, a massive lawsuit. When I say massive, I mean really massive. So the plaintiffs here are the St. Louis Regional Convention and Sports Complex Authority, the City of St. Louis, and the County of St. Louis. Now, what is this first entity, you ask? This is a quasi-public entity that owns the stadium where the Rams played. The St. Louis Dome, whatever it's called. Most stadiums that are publicly owned are not owned directly by the city or county. They form this entity for a variety of reasons, liability reasons, money, finance reasons, all kinds of things. So that's what that entity is, but it's really a combination of the city and the county. So they've sued the NFL, every NFL team, and every NFL owner individually in the NFL. So when I say massive, I'm talking 32 teams, including the Rams. They sued the Rams. 32 teams, 32 owners who are individual defendants as well. So there are a lot of parties in this thing. And where this came up before when we were talking about this was that there had been some discovery requests, remember, for finances. And our hope was that some of it would leak, so then we would know how much money the NFL makes. So as it turns out, they did have to turn the information in. The records were sealed, and we never found out. Of course. But that was that bit. But what's interesting here is I think the impact of the lawsuit. So let's just start with what they're alleging here. They're alleging breach of contract, unjust enrichment, fraudulent misrepresentation, and tortious interference. And what is all that? So the breach of contract part, there it says it turns out the NFL Constitution and bylaws has objective standards by process by which NFL teams have to follow if they want to leave. And this was born out of the Raiders' departure from Oakland in the mid 80s, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said you guys need to come up with something objective, and so they did. So St. Louis, and by St. Louis I mean all three of the defendants, St. Louis says that the Rams botched this. They didn't follow the standards. The NFL let them not follow the standards. And the reason why all the teams are plaintiffs is that, one, all the teams profited from the Rams move to Los Angeles, and the NFL teams are the NFL. You know, they own the NFL, basically. So, anyway, that's the breach of contract part. The unjust enrichment part, the Rams claim that, St. Louis claims that the Rams the value of the team increased dramatically when they moved to Los Angeles, and they profited financially from an income standpoint from the move to Los Angeles. And so they're saying, hey, you guys can't keep this ill-gotten gain because you breached contract, you did all these things wrong to us, and so we're actually entitled to the money. That's what the unjust enrichment is. The fraudulent misrepresentation, there's a whole bunch of quotes in this lawsuit from Stan Kroenke and a bunch of other team execs in which they told the media and told fans in the couple years leading up to the several years, like 5 years leading up to the move, that they didn't want to move, various iterations of they didn't want to move, they want football to remain in St. Louis and that kind of thing. And so the St. Louis is calling that fraudulent misrepresentation. Some of it's just outright lies. And then finally, the tortious interference with business expectancy. And basically, what that is that St. Louis took a bunch of steps, spent a bunch of money, signed a bunch of contracts in expectation of having the Rams there for longer than they were. And the allegation basically is that the NFL interfered with all these contracts by allowing the Rams to move. So that's the lawsuit. And then part two of this is the settlement, because they're talking billions of dollars, okay? So then there's a whole separate, which I want to get into later, there's a whole separate argument between Stan Kroenke, who owns the Rams, and the NFL, in the NFL teams, because there, as it turns out, is an indemnity agreement out there between the Rams and the NFL that says the Rams are going to own whatever damages are caused by the move. And so the NFL's point is, whatever this judgment is, if there's a judgment or a settlement, you're on your own, dude. You got to pay it. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And so Stan Kroenke said, I don't want to do that. I don't think this indemnity clause extends this far. And it's a poorly written indemnity, amazingly enough. And we'll get into that. So there are those two separate things going on. And then the settlement is the third part, which is very interesting about what could happen. But let's start, so I can stop talking and let Chris talk. Let's start with, Chris, your reaction to just this lawsuit in general.
Yeah, and I actually basically have a couple follow-up questions, I think, that might even help, because where I'm still cloudy and you can part the clouds, so I think it would help everybody. Well, one, to me, it's just like, this is a massive headache for the NFL on a number of levels. One, just the issue itself, which is obvious. But two is now, how many multiple, sort of inter-family conflicts can they handle at one time? These are one of 32, the owners, right? It's one of the most powerful, boardrooms, whether you want to call it a boardroom or hidden cabal or whatever you want to do to draw a circle around these 32 owners, and then the league, and then Goodell and the rest of the league office that does their bidding. It's as powerful a group as there are in the face of the earth, or at least in anything we'd call the entertainment industry. So to start having rifts like this with major owners, and Kroenke seems pretty dead set against going at his own and just, for at whatever cost. And I wonder at what point that cost is too great for the NFL. But my big question for you, Steve, and you hinted at this a few times, is how does a deal like this get so shoddily done that would allow this level of nonsense years after the move? Like, are there just no adults in the room? Was it just
Um,
greed, speed? What was it?
well, and for those of you who haven't listened before, I was outside counsel to an NFL team and to a Super Bowl host committee. So I don't proclaim to be an expert, but I have been in the room with these people. Um, so number one part of it is extreme arrogance. Okay, the NFL thinks of itself as the 8 million pound gorilla in the room. And a lot of times I really couldn't care less what any local government thinks or what any local people thinks. And if you read the lawsuit, you'll see that like Jerry Jones is mentioned in here in particular, and if it's it's 52 pages long, but if you want to read it, but Jerry Jones makes it abundantly clear that whatever St. Louis thinks doesn't really matter. And so part of the answer to your question is, how does this happen? Part of it is it's just extreme arrogance. We don't care. Nothing can possibly harm us. It doesn't matter. Yes, on some level, particularly the indemnity, which we're going to get to, it's just shoddy legal work. Truly, and the relocation process that they talk about in this lawsuit is pretty specific. It's not anything all that dire. I mean, you have to put a proposal together. You have to have some public notice in the local newspaper. You have to have a public, hearing thing to let people respond to it, and then you vote. It's not like nuclear fission, and they just didn't follow it. And again, it's mostly just arrogance. And when you get 32 billionaires in a room, that's more ego than the universe should have to have in one room. And that, more than anything, in my view of all of the NFL, has always been because they think of themselves as the 8 million pound gorilla. They think they will never lose. They think that they can do no wrong, and if they do no wrong, it doesn't matter at all. I was asked, I'm not going to say by who or the city or anything, but I was asked to write a memo about how far the NFL could go to control commerce during a Super Bowl. That's the way they phrased it. And that's the extent of the ego of these people. And yeah, there's a ton of problems. I could go down this list, and about half of them have got major issues going on in terms of these owners. I mean, Bill Bidwell, total train wreck of a business person. Uh, you know, um, Jerry Richardson's named in here because this lawsuit was filed in 2014 or 17. Got run out of the room for obvious reasons. Virginia McCaskey's been a train wreck. Mike Brown is a cheapskate. Jimmy Haslam almost got indicted by the feds for fraud and all kinds of stuff. Barely escaped with his life. And the list goes on. So I think the answer to your question is just we don't care at all. We're the NFL, and it absolutely doesn't matter what we do because you can't touch us. That's the attitude.
It, how worried should the NFL be that some kind of, I guess in this case, state authority, but I've also seen some stories about how this could jump jurisdictions to federal depending on how different rulings come out. So I think there is some, the feds aren't completely out of this story, even though it's currently the trial or whatever the processing is in the state. How worried should the NFL be that the state or other governmental body is going to be able to get at what they've got and, kind of take a pound of flesh at some point?
Well, first of all, the NFL is the one that's trying to change venues. The NFL would. I was very surprised. I told you off the air, Chris. I was very surprised it was even in state court at all. I spent like 20 minutes looking for this lawsuit in the federal records, and I realized, wait a minute, it's in Missouri records. St. Louis intentionally filed this. They could have filed this in federal court. They've got plaintiffs or defendants all over the country. That alone, they want it in state court because they think they're going to get an advantage when they have local courts involved, local judges, and state courts tend to be more favorable, at least the theory is, to local issues, where if you go to a federal court, not necessarily the case. At least that's the theory. So it's the NFL that wants to jump jurisdictions it would definitely be more advantageous, in my view, or the NFL to move it to federal court. But that got turned down. That's already been to an appellate court. This case is stuck in Missouri, and I think, and it's in, by the way, it's in the 22nd Judicial Circuit Court of St. Louis City, Missouri. That's the court it's in. I think it's pretty. I think the NFL needs to be worried. They've lost every motion on this. Basically, they filed a bunch of motions. They've lost all of them. I think they should be very worried that they're going to get a massive judgment out of this. Doesn't mean, they would appeal it. Of course, it would go to the Missouri Supreme Court. It's not beyond the realm of possible. They could find a way to appeal it to the Supreme Court somehow or another. It's not going to be the end if there's a judgment. But they should be very worried. Now, trial date is set for January. It's coming up. So this brings us to the super interesting part of this, which is that there's been talk of a settlement. And when I say settlement, I'm talking like $500 to $700 million level of settlement. Because the damages here are in the billions. What they're basically saying is, one, all the tens of millions of dollars we, St. Louis, spent on this team in expectation that the team was going to be there longer, and these negotiations we had, and all these contracts we entered to revamp the stadium, that's part of it. And then the other damages are because the St. Louis football franchise increased in value tremendously by going to LA. None of that is justified. This is the unjust enrichment part. None of that is properly in your hands, NFL. It all ought to belong to us, because essentially it was your misconduct that caused it to our detriment. So a judgment could literally be billions. So that's the damages. Thoughts on scope of damages and whatnot, Chris? Because I could keep talking here, but I want to give you a shot.
I would say I think this is one of those ones where we definitely see a settle, and I'd be curious to see at what point. It's the plaintiffs, right? The people in St. Louis.
The St. Louis are the plaintiffs. Yes.
Yeah. So at what point do the plaintiffs feel like they got recouped all of their losses and made made some money back? Because if you're talking, if its settlement is in that range, $700-800 million. I'm sure that means that all of the St. Louis will be, and the people will be paid back at that point. So, they're not, at some point, they don't want to push this all the way to the end, I would guess, especially if they're at a profit margin they can accept.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think St. Louis would settle for that. Stan Kroenke already offered him $100 million as an opening salvo, and that got turned down, of course. Here's the interesting part, okay, about this settlement. I mentioned this before. So all the defendants, again, is the NFL, and then all 32 teams, and then all 32 owners. Those are the defendants. So when the Rams left St. Louis, the NFL, as a part of the regular stadium or relocation process, made the NFL sign made the Ram. I'm trying to find it here. Here it is. Okay. The NFL made the Rams, sign an indemnity agreement. So what an indemnity is, it basically says, if I indemnify Chris, Chris suffers damages as a result of my misdeeds, then I will agree to pay his damages and pay his legal fees. That's basically what indemnity is. You even if you take your kids to the skate park or whatever, they make you sign an indemnity even if you don't realize it. So, but here's the interesting part. The indemnity is poorly written. Okay? And so the key word here is, it says, any relocating club agrees to indemnify in respect of any costs, including legal fees and litigation expenses incurred. So the word costs is what's at issue here. Usually indemnities will say, I agree to indemnify you for any damages suffered, to include claims and any costs, including legal fees. So by using just the word costs, there's an argument that it doesn't include damages, just costs. And that may seem like a kind of petty to non-lawyers, but I think it's a pretty big. I think that's a pretty big difference, and it's a pretty massive oversight by whoever drafted this indemnity. They absolutely should have mentioned damages and claims in here. This is just really poorly written. This is like written by like a first-year associate, and nobody bothered to read it. Seriously. And I got this. This is the first thing I've ever agreed with Mike Florio on. It's Florio is the one who picked up on this, and I hate Florio, but in this case, he's right. He's the one that found this indemnity clause, and he wrote a column about it on PFT dated November 12th. So despite my dislike for him, props to him for finding this. And he's 100% right about his interpretation of this. So the issue here is that the NFL says, you indemnified us. This $700 million judgment you need to pay is your problem entirely. Kroenke says, it ain't my problem. It's all of our problems. And what he's threatening to do is this. This is beautiful. Kroenke's a scumbag. Don't misunderstand me, but what he's threatening to do is, I'm going to settle this lawsuit, and I'm only going to get the Rams and myself released. If you guys don't pay it, I'm only going to get them to release the Rams and us and me, meaning that St. Louis could continue the lawsuit against the rest of the NFL and get another judgment against all the teams. That's what Kroenke's threatening. And it all comes down to somebody wrote a horrible indemnity clause. So there's a sub-war. There's the massive war between St. Louis and the NFL. Then there's a sub-war going on between Kroenke alone and the rest of the owners. So imagine the next owners meeting, how this is going to go.
Yeah, no, that's the part that Civil War part is the one that fascinates me the most here in this case.
Yeah, that's why I want to do this whole story. Yeah, is really to lead to this.
Because here that's a quite a game of chicken that he's one of their 32 is now playing internally, and I kind of was floored when I saw that story break this week. That here is this. How cracked is this, or how maybe probably just potentially huge are the payouts that they're willing to kind of brinkmanship this here a little bit internally? That to me, when those kind of external cracks happen, you got to wonder where the bilge is burst.
Well, yeah, I mean, but think about this. I mean, even for a guy like Stan Kroenke, who's a multi-billionaire. And if you don't know who Kroenke is, he's a major real estate developer worth, I don't know, $10 billion. I don't know what his net worth is, but it's along those lines. So he's got a ton of money. But even for a guy like that, $700 million is a lot. And so you divide between 5 and 700 million by 32, you're talking about between 20 and 25 million a team, which is doable. Whereas $700 million for Stan Kroenke, obviously that's a huge hit. So I think to him it's worth it to roll the dice and irritate his fellow owners, because there's just so much money involved that I think it's worth it to him. But there's no doubt he's causing cracks. Here's the other real interesting part about this. There's talk, and I give Dan Patrick Dan Patrick is where I first heard this. Like Wednesday or Thursday on his show as I was driving into work. He said that there's talk that he's heard about a settlement potentially including an expansion franchise, an obligation to put an expansion franchise in St. Louis. Now, that would be 3 teams, which means then they'd have to do another one to keep the AFC and NFC balanced. So, and then he said he's heard that as a result of this, the NFL had discussed that what has been talked about is expanding up to 40 teams.
Yeah, I saw this.
Yeah, and all this stems from this Rams thing, because if they get saddled with, the idea here would be, let's reduce the size of the settlement from $700 million down to something more reasonable. If the obligation includes us giving you an expansion franchise by some date certain, so they can reduce the financial outlay and give them a new team. one new team is one thing. Two new teams is even doable, maybe. But when you're talking 40 teams, I mean, it's probably Europe. I would assume. I don't know if there are other 8 more markets in the NFL you could even put in the United States. And
I think Mexico City and or Toronto are always, I think, on that list.
Yeah, those are 2, and then London, and you'd have to start thinking globally for this, because I just don't think there's 8 more United States markets for the NFL. I mean, you could come up with a few: St. Louis, San Antonio, Salt Lake City, Utah. I mean, there's 3, but I mean, beyond that, and San Antonio, I think, is questionable. You've got the Texans and the Cowboys, and
that's a lot of football saturation.
Yeah,
plus college is so popular.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, where else is the NFL going to go? And so, like you said, if you throw in Mexico City, you throw in Toronto, that's what, 5 maybe, and then you have a European division. So that's the big picture is that, because then you could do London. And then you'd have to think that Germany has a little bit of a football stronghold there, So I think that's the NFL's master plan would be that coming out of this St. Louis lawsuit.
Well, the NFL, that it'd be hysterical if they're actually just maneuvering themselves into that level of expansion. Would just be total dominance. How
are you going to get 40 quarterbacks to play? I mean, that's
They'll figure that out. That's why they overpay the coaches. They'll think.
Well, you laugh, but I mean, I don't think the NFL cares at all about that. It utterly doesn't matter to them. It matters to the fans, to kind of diluting the game. But at the end, trust me, these owners don't care at all about that.
Totally. So let's do a quick look at Kroenke, because this is actually fascinating.
Okay.
So Enos Stanley Kroenke. Which I think he was already successful on his own, but he is married to a Walton, which is a Walmart heiress.
Makes things a bit easier.
Yeah, right. So, but an American billionaire businessman. I'm just reading from Wikipedia, but it's fascinating. He is the owner of Kroenke Sports and Entertainment, which, get this, is the holding company for Arsenal Football Club of the Premier League, Arsenal WFC of the WSL, the Los Angeles Rams, the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Avalanche, the Colorado Rapids of Major League Soccer, the Colorado Mammoth of the National Lacrosse League, the Los Angeles Gladiators of the Overwatch League, now we're starting to get into esports, and the newly formed Los Angeles Guerrillas of the Call of Duty League. That's his sports holding company alone.
Not even his real estate holding. So I underestimated. So $10 billion is not close. I underestimated by a lot his net worth then.
Yeah, I mean that's and what talk
Staggering.
about diversified portfolio. Major leagues, minor leagues, esports.
Well, don't underestimate the value of the Arsenal. I mean, that's NFL team level value for those of you who don't understand what about Euro soccer. I mean, the Arsenal is a major Premier League team. And so their value could be as much as the Rams or more.
Yeah, that's NFL level.
Right.
It's really fascinating. So we kind of tie these two discussions together, and then we should move on to another giant legal risk that the NFL faces. So soccer famously has that sort of elevator league thing where you can get bounced between the kind of upper tier and lower tier. I don't know all the.
It's called relegation.
Yeah, that's right. With 40 NFL teams, I wonder if you almost have to look at something like that.
I mean, it depends on your priorities, right? If your priority is to maintain the quality of the competition, you'd have to have something like that. On the other hand, though, you can't make a big deal about handing St. Louis and London and Mexico City NFL teams and then go, well, they could actually end up in the minor league. But still, you need to still spend $1 billion spending our stadium. You're spending money on our stadium because a part of this, I know this, but it's actually in the lawsuit. Excuse me. So at one point, St. Louis was under the impression that the NFL was going to spend $300 million on a new stadium for the Rams in St. Louis. And there's a quote in here. I'm going to find it. It just sums up everything I've been talking about the arrogance of the NFL. But what Roger Goodell said about this. Um, oh, I should have had it up and ready. It's so great. He said it's not. I'll find it here. He said it's something like that does not conform to the NFL stadium development policy. Something like that. Meaning, if you expect the NFL to spend $300 million, we're just utterly not going to do that. That's because the NFL. I'm telling you, these guys don't think they need to spend money. Their open policy with regard to stadiums is we will cajole and force, and browbeat you into spending public money on this because we will not spend money on stadiums. And so a big part of this lawsuit is about that. Oh, here it is. This is so great. So this is paragraph 40 of this lawsuit. It says on December 15th, I'm going to quote this because it's so good. On December 17th, 2015, Roger Goodell, with reference to a St. Louis stadium financing, stated that a St. Louis proposal assuming a commitment by the NFL to provide $300 million for funding towards a stadium in St. Louis was, quote, fundamentally inconsistent with the NFL's program of stadium financing. Meaning, we're just not going to do this no matter what, and you must raise taxes and tax the hell out of hotels and car rentals and bonds and everything else because even though we're worth, what? 100 billion maybe. If you add up the value of all these teams, we're not going to spend $300 million on you. So I thought that was really great. But the point is, I don't think even the NFL would be so arrogant to put a team in Toronto and say, Toronto, you need to spend $2 billion on a stadium, but we're going to relegate your franchise because it's going to be an expansion. It's going to suck immediately, so you can't stay in the real NFL, but continue to spend money on the stadium. Even the NFL, I think, might not do that.
Yeah, no, I could see that point, but it would have all kinds of competitive implications to have 40 teams, and I think at some point you'd hope someone would figure out some way in which to balance that. Two things on Kroenke that I still find. First of all, Steve, I'm going to give you, get ready. You're going to give you some props here.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia, he is worth Kroenke $10 billion by
Forbes'. I was right.
By Forbes' estimate in 2020. So pretty good. Good job, Steve. And just to kind of go back into the time machine of stories that we covered, remember that midnight coup of the English soccer leagues, that European Super League, all that. Well, Kroenke was one of the owners that was in the middle behind. Of that. Yeah, he was one of the ones. He was one of the break-off owners. So he was all over that scandal as well in European soccer.
Why does that not surprise me? This lawsuit, and again, lawsuits, people need to understand lawsuits are not facts. They're just allegations, and you hear this in criminal stuff all the time. So it's a biased story written to sway a jury, okay? But this lawsuit makes Stan Kroenke look like a horrible human being. Some of these quotes in here, he's just flat out saying, I would never move the Rams, this and that. And at the same time, he bought the land from in LA where the SoFi Stadium now sits in 2013. Immediately told the media, we didn't buy this for a stadium. It's shaped wrong. It's terrible land for a stadium. In the meantime, he told his business partner in a private phone call, this is the dream stadium land. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth on this stuff, and it makes him look really, really bad. There's no doubt about it. So the fact that it's Kroenke doing this doesn't surprise me, but you guys have to understand, all of these owners are like this. Kroenke's far richer than most owners. He makes Daniel Snyder look like a pauper, for example. But most of these owners are sleazeballs. That's why they became billionaires, because they're not afraid to crush crush everybody along the way and a bunch of little people.
Yeah. And even within that room, sometimes the people they consider little people are still one of those other 32.
Yeah, because, like Chris said, this man married a Walton.
Yeah.
And the Walton family is, I think, probably the richest family in the world, I would assume.
So we can assume that the legal fees at the NFL office, I wonder what they budgeted for, but they're probably ticking up, but they're not only ticking up because of
Well, the legal fees are
Kroenke
the Kroenke is paying the legal fees under the
of the
indemnity.
NFL.
Yeah,
Oh,
he's paying
oh,
all the legal fees, which is a lot, but it's nothing. But that's remember I said the difference between the word cost and the indemnity and the word damages. There's no argument that he owes the fees because it says legal fees specifically. The debate is whether costs include damages. So he's got the legal fees, and again, it's probably $10 million maybe. These lawyers are making $1,000 an hour, and there's an army of them, going.
So, what is the other army of NFL lawyers probably nervous on and boning up to deal with?
John Gruden. So, if you recall, John Gruden was publicly humiliated and then fired over a bunch of emails he had sent Bruce Allen because, of course, Bruce Allen that had a whole bunch of racist nonsense in it and this racist tropes, with regard to African Americans and, when he was talking about DeMaurice Smith, made him look like a fool and all of that. So he got fired. He lost his basically all of his gigs that he had and sponsors and all of that. So he has now filed a lawsuit against the NFL, alleging that. Sorry, my phone was making noise. It's still making noise because I can't turn it off. Anyway, he's filed a lawsuit against the NFL saying that the NFL is trying to ruin his life, basically, and I intentionally didn't pull the lawsuit in this one because the more interesting part isn't really the causes of action. It's the lawsuit itself. And what he's saying is the NFL, somebody out here intentionally ruined my life. That's what the lawsuit is. And frankly, he has a point. I'm not defending what he said. What he said were just stupid and, awful things. But I'd like your theory on this, Chris. How did it come that out of 650,000 emails, John Gruden is the only one that got smeared and leaked?
Put everything aside in terms of what he said, blah, blah, blah. This is not, separate. Who cares? It was horrible. Whatever. But he 100% has a point. And this is the piece that stunk the whole time and why this story won't go away. And it isn't going to go away anytime soon. Now you have so many different people kind of at different angles about, whether they're in danger or whether they feel they've been wronged or what danger is out there that we don't know about. It's like it's become this like quest for the 650,000 emails, right? And it made no sense. And the only way there's any logic to the fact that those emails saw the light of day was that someone was out for John Gruden. Now, is it the NFL? Is it someone within Snyder's camp? Is it a whistleblower type situation within the NFL? Is it, who knows? But somebody was either out to kneecap John Gruden directly or was willing to kneecap John Gruden to get to a bigger prize. Kind of a public flipping of John Gruden. And they're getting, if that was the case, they're getting exactly what they want because there's multiple people, the quest for these emails, right? It's like Cannonball Run out there. So eventually someone's going to get at these or, what's the NFL going to do to protect these? Because there's obviously some stuff in those emails and John Gruden is like, I'm not being the fall guy for this web of malfeasance.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 650,000 emails written by a bunch of NFL coaching meatheads, I bet my life that John Gruden is not the only one that said stupid things. And so, yeah, forget about what he said. Nobody's defending all this stupid nonsense he said, but it 100% looks like somebody, to use your word, somebody kneecapped him. And that's his point is somebody, NFL, you guys are responsible for it, basically, because you're the ones that had the emails. You intentionally ruined my life. And that's the subject of the lawsuit. And so, I mean, sure, what the NFL certainly does not want these emails to get out, and so this lawsuit will probably have a confidential settlement, and it'll probably go away, and they'll pay John some huge amount of money to basically make up for the bulk of his contract, and that's probably how it'll end, and we'll never see the financial terms of it. But without defending John Gruden's character, I'm on John's side in terms of what happened to him. I guess it's just safe to say like that. Don't defend what he said, but what happened to him, he's got a very valid point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it'll be fascinating, because whether it's the lawyers that are still involved with the ex Washington football team employees, whether who are more of these emails going to come out? That's what's the other thing. There's like a loaded, it's like one of those things where there's like a loaded gun floating in a room, but no one's exactly sure where it is or who has it, right?
Didn't we have a bet going at one of these shows we did where we were talking about what's gonna be the next to drop in these?
Yeah, we right. We should have like a leaderboard or something. Odds on top
Who's
10
next to get smeared by the
possibilities.
emails?
Yeah, but that also to me is a fascinating part of this because those still exist, right? And a cache of them was already leaked. So how much is that holding sway and is leverage? And I don't know. I think that I'm surprised that the NFL and the Raiders, and I know that's not a great relationship, so that's probably part of this, didn't figure out a way to make sure that Gruden had enough I'm happy go away money to not open this wound.
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, if you want to fire John Gruden and you want to keep him quiet, knowing that there's 650,000 emails, of which some of them are going to be damaging, what you do is you say, okay, we want you gone. But what we're going to do to keep you quiet is we're going to pay out the bulk of your contract in exchange for a release of liability from you. Instead of just saying, get out, you're fired, too bad, and then leaving a huge gaping legal hole that's going to result in this, the NFL are idiots, and the Raiders are idiots for not doing that. I mean, it's weird because the NFL used to win all these kind of lawsuits and not make these kind of mistakes, but it comes back to what I was saying about the Rams lawsuit. There's a ton of arrogance with the NFL because there's so much money and there's so much popularity in the the whole United States entertainment world fawns all over them, and you got 32 billionaires who think they can do no wrong, and so a lot of things recently have gotten overlooked. Think about this. The concussion lawsuit, they're on the hook for billions for those, and they just arrogantly said, there's nothing to this and whatnot. And guess what? Now they have this whole settlement fund and it costs them a lot of money doing that. Remember the lawsuit about how the NFL's like insurance actuarial people had...
the racial profiling. And
well, if you recall, what I'm talking about there is the NFL's concussion, the insurance eggheads that were managing the concussion lawsuit established a baseline of intelligence for African Americans that was different than the Caucasian players, which is openly racist, and so a bunch of players sued. So they left themselves open for that. The NFL has left themselves open repeatedly in the past decade, all kinds of stuff, and so it makes me wonder. I mean, they still have all the best law firms that Wall Street can buy. It just makes me wonder if just the extreme level of arrogance has caused them to start overlooking a bunch of things.
Yeah, it definitely seems like if there's ever a candidate for hubris, it's the NFL.
Yes.
So I think that's
the
driving
word of the
that.
day, hubris.
So we'll see. I mean, it just I don't know. I've never been anywhere near that level of wealth, power, or ability to sniff anything called hubris. So I don't know. I don't know. What kind of headiness gets caught up in it. But when
I've been in the room with some of these. I've been in the room with some of these people, and again, it's just.
Are they just that divorced from common sense at some point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you can see this in like Hollywood celebrities and whatnot. People like this tend to mouth off about things they have no idea what they're talking about because they have so much money and so much fame and so many people around them telling them that they're great that sometimes they forget that they don't know what they're talking about. Don't know what they're doing, but there's so much ego and money around them that if they think it excuses them. So, I think the NFL owners has fall into that. A bunch of Hollywood actors fall into that. Why should we care what Robert De Niro thinks about anything about acting, for example? I'm just throwing his name out there for no reason. And I think the NFL falls into this. Jerry Jones, probably a smart guy, but he's no Einstein, but he's got a lot of money and power, and so he thinks he can do what he wants. And so what does he do? According to the Rams lawsuit, let's just move the Rams to LA and not tell anybody, and we're going to lie to the public about it, and it'll be no problem because I'm Jerry Jones. That's basically what the lawsuit's saying, and you have no reason to doubt that most of that is true. And so those are the type of people we're seeing. And then this Gruden stuff, it's the same thing. It's like, screw you, John Gruden. Go away. And what happened? They could have easily made him go away quietly. Instead, they're too stupid to do it.
I mean, so in one way, you think, of course, these people are just people. They're dumb in so many ways, and half of them are just lucky. So we shouldn't assume that these are Mensa convention in that.
Stan Kroenke married to Walton. Let's repeat that.
Right. So I understand that. You get that. What I find kind of amazing, but then I actually can convince myself isn't that amazing, is that they don't have better people around to ensure about this. But then you think, well, you know what? It's actually pretty difficult to speak that level of truth to power in those scenarios. So it's not, we can't just assume that a bunch of these lawyers or insurance actuaries or whoever the professionals are, they're probably highly skilled, highly trained. It's really a discussion for them about whether they want to raise these concerns or fight back, or if they've been told to do it this way 3 or 4 times, how many times are they going to stick their neck out there to get it chopped off to do it the way they would advise?
Because you can't mouth off to a billionaire.
Right. So if he said, no, I want it this way, you're like, well, you can say you maybe should consider it once. And then after that, you can't say it that many more times.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you get 32 of those people in a room, and all of a sudden they think they can move mountains when the mountain can't actually be moved.
Right. So you see Jerry Jones sitting in that room, and there's some 40-year-old lawyer who knows this stuff up and down, pointing out what the problems are. And, Jerry Jones, throwing a notebook across the boardroom table and says, you're not me. You haven't done what I've done. Do it this way.
Because to back to the Rams thing, this relocation policy is very specific in its objective, and it's signed and everybody agreed to, and it has very specific steps. And so that unnamed lawyer you're talking about would say, okay, you have to publish this notice, you have to have a hearing, these are the requirements and elements of the proposal. And Jerry Jones and Stan Kroenke just go, so what? We don't care what it says. We're going to do it anyway. What's somebody going to do? Sue us? I don't care if they sue us at all. And this is how you end up with things like a lawsuit where there's 10 figures at risk,
So insane. Well, we want to talk about one realm of funny money into another realm of funny money and close out this episode. We've been tracking the rise of cryptocurrency into the sports world on various fronts. Athletes taking their pay or representing crypto companies, the added millions and potentially billions of ad revenue into sports and sports ownership. So we see another pretty interesting development. The famous Staples Center, of course, where the Clippers and the Lakers play in a kind of iconic stadium, is now not going to be known as the Staples Center any longer. It's what's the company, Steve? It's some crypto company. There you go. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So it's now, Lakers at the Crypto.com Center.
Yeah,
what is the deal?
That's coming. It's not yet, but it's coming over, I believe it's Christmas. Name change takes effect on Christmas Day. So
basically tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm assuming the Lakers are going to be, on Christmas Day, I guess. And so that's a big point. So what I want to point out, first of all, we saw this. Chris found this on CNBC. Jabari Young, Crypto.com buys naming rights to the Lakers Staples Center. Published on November 17th. Jabari Young, we've done a bunch of his stories. Anyway, so this is a $700 million deal over 20 years. I believe it's 20 years. Yeah. Let's see. 20. I think it's 20 years. That's a huge stadium sports naming rights deal. That's giant. I worked on one of these. It was not anywhere close to this size. But if you think about it, Staples Center might be the preeminent sports development in the country. Certainly, it's one of them. It's Ann Schultz Entertainment built this thing. It's right downtown. There's a ton of other business, around it. It's a major, for those of you who aren't LA people, and I'm certainly not, it's a major, major development. And it's the Lakers. The Clippers are leaving, by the way.
Oh, they are? I didn't know
The
that.
Clippers are building their own stadium.
They should. That makes sense.
Yeah, right. And so it's just going to be the Lakers and the Kings, the LA Kings in there. But 700 million is a huge number, giant number. It might be. I think the story said it's the biggest ever. I believe. Let's see. I'm hunting for this. Your thoughts?
Well, to me, I mean, we see these kind of things all the time, basically. So the fact that a stadium is changing its naming rights and it's a big deal, financial deal, et cetera, is, would normally be maybe just a blip. We might not even talk about it, right? That's, they change it like underwear, some of these stadiums. So, but to me, and I've got a little bit of a work crossover into some cryptocurrency and blockchain-y type stuff. To me, what it signifies, and especially when you look at the terms of the deal, there is a small set of people who have made a lot of money in cryptocurrency over the last 10 years and are continuing to, who don't know what to do with it. And then there's these companies that are vying to sort of win at all this. I mean, this is one of the biggest new money influxes that we've seen, at least since that sort of, various booms and busts of .com and Silicon Valley, but it's sort of off the back of that, and probably leapfrogs it to some degree, and considering that so much of this is just creating your own currencies and inflating the value thereof, so it's not like the iPhone took over the world, right? It's like, well, we're going to create wealth by creating new currencies and all kinds of, just transactions for transaction's sake. So it really shows me when they're throwing out monies to do things like buy the naming rights to the Laker stadiums and all that means. It's just there's money out there. They're making so much money they don't know exactly even what to do with it.
And it's a 20-year agreement. It's 20 years. And so Crypto.com thinks it's going nowhere, but up. And just to give context here, so the Clippers' new deal was worth $500 million. Chase Bank's deal with this Golden State Warriors deal was $300 million. So, and then Staples Center's original deal dating back to 1999 was for $116 million. So that's the scope and level of what we're talking about here. So yeah, it is interesting that you could do a whole, I'm sure there are many podcasts on crypto already, but
there are.
Crypto.com is willing to obligate itself to pay $700 million over 20 years means that they think the future is booming. I mean, they need to be worried about some federal regulators and tax. The Treasury doesn't like them, and there's a whole bunch of issues. And again, that's for another show entirely. There's certainly concerns if I were crypto, but the bottom line is they think it's, regardless of all that, because, the federal government doesn't like crypto because it's hard to tax. It's replacing, national currencies basically. And so the governments don't like crypto. But Crypto.com clearly doesn't care.
Yeah, no, I think that's and like I said, there's not really a product there necessarily. I mean, there might be like some kind of financial service thing that you can do at Crypto.com. I'm not saying that, but
they're making money off fees basically, right?
Yeah. Which is, so is SoFi, for instance. So like they're, sort of banks just they're,
but point is, if they have this kind of money to shell out, it's a hell of a lot of fees.
Yeah, they can jump right up there with the Chase Manhattans, right? So, what I do think is happening, though, if you kind of look at sports always as a bit of barometer of society at large, just look at this one example: Staples Center, business, paper, place to get your copies, place to get business supplies, more, basically exists to support a nation of small and medium-sized businesses that can't order at bulk and need like outsourcing of their, IT department, all these kinds of things. it is such a out with the old, in with the new. Just that you track who's buying the naming rights of these stadiums, right? And you add, the Monster.coms of the world that came through. It's not that the Monster.com has gone away. They just have got enough of the market share now where they don't need to necessarily always buy those things, and they still exist at that level somewhere. But the big gambling initiatives, you can really start to see where society is going, or where certain aspects of society are going, by who's got the money to pay for these naming rights. And paper out, digital ones and zeros through giant decentralized server farms are in.
Makes you kind of wonder if there's going to be a FanDuel stadium somewhere, doesn't it?
Oh, I would be shocked if there isn't one in 3 years. Shocked.
Yeah, I agree. So no, I think it is interesting. It's sort of showing the direction of the economy. Because you're not seeing the McDonald's Arena anymore, the Toyota Center, or it's the future of the economy is sort of where these naming right deals are going right now. Yeah, I agree. That's good.
It'll be the good little petri dish to watch this in will be this year's Super Bowl. Just tracking
what
who's buying.
Yeah,
what are the ads? You can laugh at them or whatever. I'm not talking about their quality or whatever. But if you look at the top 15 advertisers,
it's already going that way now. This year's was going headed that direction.
Do a 10-year, 20-year mapping of those would be super fascinating.
Yeah, you go from Bud Light and Coke to Crypto and Monster and
Yeah, less filling, great taste. All right, with that, we just aged ourselves immensely.
Yeah, yes.
Those are great ads, though.
They are.
All right, Steve. Well, there's maybe a little bit more excitement in the mid-season of the Hogstein now, or is it still the slog? Or we'll find out here in 24 hours.
They won one game, okay? It was a great game, but I'm not going to get too excited. So yes, we are still in the middle of the slog. It's just a little bit less painful of the slog, perhaps. But we're still doing 2 shows a week. We have our regular game previews that come out on Thursday, our game recaps on Monday. Rick Snyder, formerly of the Washington Post and a bunch of other media outlets, has The Season's Discontent, which is his look at all things Washington, D.C. sports and life. There are 2 15-minute shows a week. He has a YouTube page also that you need to check out. I think it's just Rick Snyder, or it's either that or Rick Snyder's Washington, one of the two. But check him out on YouTube, and we have all of our regular written content.
I have to call out lovingly Alex Zeese, who, I've been following his Redskins takes now. Jeez Louise, it's probably going on.
Well, he's doing
years.
our Twitter, so you're talking about Hogside Twitter, yeah.
Well, it's also been on his, but he loves to have the dumb take and then chain himself to it. This why did they not kick the extra point take is an all-time Alex Zeese hill to die on. He's wrong, and it's a dumb thing to argue about.
So what did you have to tell me about this afterwards, because I missed this. I don't.
No, he's just up in arms. They should have kicked the extra point at the end of the game. He's making this big issue about how that was a tactical mistake.
Oh, okay. Well, we love Alex.
Yeah, right. So I have to say that if I were to compile my top 5 of silly Alex Zeese hot takes, that might be on my top 5.
That was a strange decision, but yeah.
Well, you can make the football case for it,
right?
So you should ask him about it. All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks.